Good evening, everyone. My name is Rhonda Applebaum, and I'm the College and Career Information Coordinator at Winston Churchill High School. Tonight, we are hosting a webinar with Ann Dolan of Educational Connections. The topic of tonight's webinar is uncovering your teen's unique story, strategies to shine on college applications. Before we get started, I'm going to give you a little background information on Ann, and I will let her take over the webinar. Anne has been in the industry for over 30 years working with students. She's developed practical strategies that she shares to help kids succeed and make the most of their academic journey, including college admissions. Anne is a former public school teacher and author who founded Educational Connections in 1998. The company provides virtual tutoring, executive functioning coaching, test prep, and college admissions counseling in Maryland, Virginia, and DC. She and her team specialize in helping students to craft the narrative and strong high school resume, enabling them to stand out in a very competitive college admissions environment. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Anne, let her take over the webinar for the remainder of the evening. So
Thank you. Thank you, Rhonda. Thank you so much for that introduction and for hosting us this evening. Well, welcome everybody. We're going to talk a lot about how your child can differentiate himself or herself in the application process. And fortunately, I have an expert here with me this evening to shed even more light on this really important topic. And Kristin, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here.
Thanks for having me, Ann.
Please meet Kristin Landis. She's a college consultant here with me at Educational Connections. And prior to coming to the company, she worked at the University of Virginia for 11 years as an admissions evaluator. So she really knows what colleges look for when they're looking at an application, whether to admit, defer, waitlist that student. In fact, our entire team at Educational Connections has worked in admissions, so they understand what it's like on the other side of the table. Kristin has reviewed more than 10,000 applications during her time at UVA. And for the last few years at Educational Connections, she's worked with hundreds of kids. At UVA, she evaluated students applying in-state, applying out-of-state, transfer students, and also international applicants. So Kristin, let's start out by talking about what's changed in college admissions and the current landscape.
Sure, absolutely. So we just finished the most competitive application cycle that we've seen to date. I feel like we say that every year, but it continues to escalate. So I'm very happy that everyone's here tonight to get some insight into the college application process. Once again, Anne, when we do these webinars every year, we talk about an increase in applications, and the Common App has again recorded that there was a 6% in applications increase this past year. When there is an increase in applications, that means a decrease in acceptance rates. So once again, we're faced with that. Another thing that we saw this past year, and this has been happening every single year since the pandemic, is the importance of test scores. And we're going to talk about test scores later tonight. But before the pandemic, test scores were very important. They kind of got thrown out of the window with the pandemic. And systematically, they become more important because college admissions offices are being quite verbose in saying that they feel like there's a lot of grade inflation out there, and that test scores are one of the few indicators where they can see academic readiness and fit. And then another trend that we're seeing is this past year, which I thought was interesting, was an increase in applications to public universities versus private. We saw about a 12% increase in public universities applications versus about 8% in private colleges, and mostly predominantly in the South. But take, for an example, University of Maryland. So this year they had a 43% overall acceptance rate, whereas 5 years ago, it was a 51% acceptance rate. So you're seeing that go down. When I started at UVA, they received 24,000 applications. This past year, they had 64,000 applications. So we're definitely seeing that in the public sector, and especially out-of-state students. It's the out-of-state applications that are increasing. Another thing that we're seeing is the use of early admissions. This has been systematically escalating over the years. That's students applying early decision, which is a binding contract where you have to go to the school if you get in, or early action, which means that you just submit your application earlier, you get a decision earlier. I mean, there's even talk that early action is the new regular decision. So that trend continues. And then lastly, we're seeing a use in AI. Like every industry in the country is seeing AI being used more effectively, and college admissions is no different. There's a lot of talk about college admissions offices using ChatGPT to look at essays and see if students authentically wrote their essays. But what they are doing also is, because of this increase in applications, they're using AI to help screen applications, especially with things like teacher recommendations. They're using AI to summarize them. So these are the trends that we're seeing in college admissions. Again, super competitive. So that's why it's important to start early and have a plan.
Kristin, you mentioned public over private. Is that really a cost factor, or what is driving, especially to these large flagship state universities, what's causing that migration?
I agree. I think, Anne, you hit the nail right on the head. I think people are being more like, what's my return on my investment? Especially we live in a time of uncertainty, of economic fluidity. And so I think people are being a little bit more cognizant of that. And so they're looking more towards public universities as the cost of private institutions continues to escalate. I mean, some are now, $100,000 a year.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's crazy.
Um, yeah, it really is. All right, so let's talk about this thing called the holistic admissions review process, which a lot of universities are using. And it's a way in which kids can really put their best foot forward. What exactly is that?
Absolutely. We hear that buzzword holistic and admissions, and people are like, well, what does that actually mean? With this rise in applications, college admissions offices are looking to more ways to differentiate students and looking for students that fit their university. They're trying to look beyond the numbers. They're trying to understand what it is about the student, what kind of student they'll be at their university, what type of contribution they're going to make. They're looking at their achievements, their potential, their background. They're looking for fit for their community. Colleges want to see an alignment between students' interests, their coursework, and their activities. So when I was at UVA, I was always asking myself when I was evaluating a student, what will this student bring to my college environment? What type of contribution can they make in the classroom? What type of student will they be? Will they be engaging, collaborative? And what type of community citizen will they be outside of the classroom? What contribution can they make to their school, to my school? So it's really twofold. It's looking at, and we're going to talk about the different parts of the holistic process, but looking at their characteristics as a fit for my school, but also, is the school a fit for them? So it's a two-way street on that. I call this your personal narrative, which is, what are you interested in? What are you passionate about? What makes you tick? That's what, when we talk about a holistic review, it's looking at those things beyond the numbers.
So it's almost like there's a through line between your courses, your essay, your activities list on the Common App.
Absolutely. And that's why I know we have both ends of the spectrum. We have ninth graders and younger students tonight. We have 11th graders who are literally embarking on the college admissions process right now. So for the younger students, we'll talk a little bit about developing that narrative. But for the juniors who are about to submit applications and do their applications, it's about presenting that narrative in your application.
Yeah, that's a great point, Kristin. It really is all about, once you've done these things, how do you present it to admissions?
Very
so
important.
Let's talk about that next. What is it that admissions offices really want to see?
Sure, absolutely. So if we think of this personal narrative as a pyramid, the first thing, obviously the foundation, is going to be your academics. It's going to be what type of classes you've taken. Have you challenged yourself? What are those classes that are you showing your interest in the things that you're interested in, what you've taken? Did you put your foot on the gas in classes that you're interested in? How did you use your electives? And then, of course, how did you perform in those classes? Grades, unfortunately or fortunately, are always going to be important. So performance and coursework, that's what they're looking at. The next thing they're looking at is engagement. And engagement matters. I talked a little bit about this a few seconds ago, but they're looking to see what you're doing and how deep you're going into what you're doing. It's not about quantity, it's about quality. So identifying for the younger students who are out there, helping them identify things that they may be interested in. And that takes a lot of sleuthing sometimes with younger students. And for the older students, it's elevating that in their applications. They've already done the hard work. They've already had 3 years, these 11th graders. And now it's time for those things that they've been doing outside of school to really craft that narrative in their application for admissions offices. And then the last part of the pyramid is authentic character. And what I mean by that is there are a number of characteristics when I was at UVA that I was looking for in a student and college admissions offices look for in a student. Some of it is kind of intuitive. One of them is obviously a love of learning, a curiosity. We talk about engagement, and it's really about, collaboration, going deep in the things that you're doing, looking to see that you've taken initiative, maybe taken risks. Sometimes students show perseverance and, hard work ethic. One thing that was always a non-negotiable for me was that they were giving back to their community in some form or fashion, in the form of community service in some way. And then leadership. And not everybody can be captain of the football team and, president of the class. So leadership can be shown in many different ways. Maybe there's a group project in your history class that you took over and ran, or maybe you have a lot of family responsibilities and you take care of your younger siblings. That's all showing leadership. So each one of these pillars is what college admissions offices are looking at to see that personal narrative, to see that unique story about that student.
Kristin, let's dial in a little bit deeper and talk about specifics. Part of what you do with students is helping them to determine what their narrative is. And that, of course, is exploring their strengths. What makes them tick? What makes them get up in the morning? What do they enjoy doing? Sometimes it's not so obvious. They think they're kind of like an average kid. How do you help kids with that?
Yes, I mean, it's difficult. I mean, I'm in my late 50s, and sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't know what makes me tick sometimes. So to ask young people, it can be very difficult. So I can totally appreciate that. When I start with a student, some of the first things I say to them is, hey, what classes are you really enjoying? Or there are classes that you're sitting there looking at the clock saying, oh, get me out of here. Another thing that I always ask them is, if you had a day to yourself and you couldn't be on your phone and you couldn't hang out with your friends, what would you do? And it's having these ongoing conversations with students that it's kind of sleuthing, pulling out things. Sometimes I'll have a student and they'll say, well, I'm interested in business. I'm like, okay, well, business is a huge umbrella. I even had a student the other night, I was talking about this. I'm like, let's really kind of dissect what business means. You're in marketing. Do you like your marketing class? No, not really. I'm like, okay. Well, do you have you've been working in this little side business that you've been doing with your brother? Are you enjoying that? Yeah, I am kind of enjoying that. Okay, well, it sounds like entrepreneurship is something that you may like. How about finance? Are you interested in no, I hate that. I'm like, okay. So it's really almost like a detective thing going along with students to figure it out what they're interested in. And with younger students, we have the luxury of time to have those conversations. With older students, they've already been doing things. So now it's time to elevate that. Although I do have to say the summer before senior year for you 11th graders is super important. This is the time to truly hone in and identify what your narrative is and elevate that.
So Kristin, do you mean that kids should be, and I think we're going to touch on this again later about the summer, but kids should be making sure they know what that is and doing something over the summer that relates to their narrative?
100%. And sometimes for younger kids, it's about exploration. So if I have a student who's interested in engineering, they think they're interested in engineering. I have a student who's going to go work at a hardware store this summer. I have another student that's working on an old car. I have another student who is helping a nonprofit rehab and refurbish computers. That all shows an interest in engineering. It doesn't all have to be, going and finding some formal internship. Those are wonderful, but they're also hard to come by, or some really selective high school program where the applications are due back in January. Obviously, we love to apply for those things, but it's also really thinking outside of the box sometimes. I have a student who's interested in fashion. So she's working at a consignment shop, helping people, a clothing consignment shop, helping people put together their outfits. She also does some sewing on the side, and she's going to take a fashion class at the local university. So there are lots of different ways that you can help narrow and elevate that personal narrative. But also, there's a whole nother side to this, which is just enrichment. Really enjoying these opportunities. We want these things to be authentic. We want these things to be stuff that you're interested in.
Thanks for that, Kristin. I do know that sometimes kids come to us at Educational Connections and they're like, I really have no idea. And the parent isn't sure either.
Sure.
Talk to us about the assessment that you give kids and how an assessment can be helpful to students that are really unsure.
Absolutely. This is a really great conversation starter. So for parents who are on the webinar this evening, they will have heard of the Myers-Briggs personality test. It's kind of the poster child in personality tests. So at Educational Connections, we give an abridged Myers-Briggs personality test to students' assessments. And then we also do something that's called an intelligence module. It's not a testing intelligence. It's testing what type of learner a student is. And I find it fascinating. I did one last night with a student, and he was saying, well, I think he's interested in sports. And I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about that a little more. Are you interested in sports marketing? No, I don't think I like that. I'm like, okay, are you interested in maybe coaching? I think that's kind of interesting. And I also like broadcasting. I'm like, oh, okay. And so he had taken the personality modules, and last night it was amazing. I'm always just amazed at how these things align with what students really are interested in. So he ended up doing it, and his personality was an entertainer, which is someone who is, just gregarious and brings people together. And then his intelligence all aligned to someone who wanted to go into broadcasting or coaching. And both of us were just amazed. So now we're looking for things in the summer. He's going to go, he's looking to identify a summer camp where we can coach some little kids. He does it during the winter, but he's going to try to do it in the summer. Continuity is really important. And then we identified a sports broadcasting class for him that he's actually going to do next summer because he's a 9th grader right now. But looking for him to have these enrichment opportunities and to continue his exploration and also to elevate that narrative.
Thank you, Kristin. I love that story. All right, so we talked a little bit about the narrative, but part of that narrative is the courses that you've taken during your time in high school. Tell us about the role of course selection.
I think sometimes students don't realize, and parents, the importance of this, and it starts right before you even walk into high school, those doors. Because program rigor, as remember, we looked at that pyramid, is super important. Students are going to be evaluated against other students from their high school. So looking to see that a student has challenged themselves in the classes offered by their high school, looking to see what their classes look like compared to the student sitting next to them in English class or walking down the hall. Now, it's wonderful if a student can take, all APs or be an IB diploma student, but not everybody can do that. So identifying those areas of interest that you have and talent and putting your foot a little bit on the gas in those. And for classes that you find difficult, like I'm terrible at math, like I would probably take my foot a little bit off the gas in math, and I also have no interest in it. So making sure that balance is right, because of course you want to do well in your classes also. And then also looking at those electives. Those electives are super important, making sure that you are exploring the engineering, the STEM design classes, the CAD classes, or the theater arts or music or whatever it is you're interested in. And a lot of students don't realize this, but their senior year, for those 11th grade parents and students who are out there, your senior year is your most important year. When I went to high school back in the dinosaur ages, we took like basket weaving and senior release, and it was no big deal. Now, if you think about it, you want to see a progression in rigor. So students either need to maintain or better escalate the rigor in senior year, because if you're applying early to schools, which a lot of students are doing now, they're not going to see your senior grades first semester, but they are really going to they're going to, with a fine-tooth comb, look at your senior program. So that's super important. So course selection, very, very important. If you want to go into engineering, making sure you're taking those math classes that you track so that you can get through the BC calculus or the multivariable by the time you're a senior, and the AP physics C. If you're interested in entrepreneurship, making a business, making sure you're getting those electives in during your 4 years, those are all things that are really important. So it really starts even from middle school.
So certainly course selection is important in school, but also the activities that kids do outside of school are important, and that's also reflected on the Common App. Tell us
Yes.
about that and what's important for kids to do. How do you help your kids make the best of this?
Sure, absolutely. So we talked a lot about for younger kids exploration, identifying that narrative. For our older students who are on the webinar this evening, this is the Common App. This is where you're elevating the activities that you've done in the Common App. Right now, if you see the screen, we have a little bit of a snapshot of what the activity section looks like on the Common App. It is very, very short. It has 10 spots, and you don't have to use all 10. In fact, if you are, just going to a meeting once a month for something, it shouldn't be included on your Common App. It's only things that you have done in depth and that you have had impact in those communities in. So I always, we spend a tremendous amount of time, my juniors and I, on their activity section. You will see that for the description on the activity section, you are allowed 150 characters. That's not words, that's characters. So not a lot of space to provide someone who has no idea who you are, what your interest was, what your impact in that community was. So I have a lot of strategies in terms of how we condense and use the different parts, like the position and leadership part, very effectively in order to give an accurate snapshot of what your engagement has been.
So Kristen, in addition to grades and or course selection and common activities, excuse me, teacher recommendations and the resume play a role.
Mm-hmm.
What
100%.
exactly?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, tell us, we know what teacher recommendations are, but what is the resume?
Sure, absolutely. So I know that we have a lot of students from Montgomery County on the Zoom right now tonight. So most of them will have already known that they have a counselor questionnaire that was either due last month or is due this month or next month for their counselor, because your counselor also writes a recommendation for you. And so these questionnaires are incredibly important. We have a very strategic way of how we do them. I can tell you that I've probably read 30,000 recommendations in my career, and 99% of them are fine. They're good. Anne is engaged. Anne is a participant or whatever. That's wonderful. Doesn't give me a whole lot of insight into you and what type of community citizen you're going to be, what you're passionate about, what you're interested in. So we provide a lot of specifics in our questionnaires, and we provide a resume. And this is not a resume for a job that usually they're one pagers. These are ones that we're hoping that teachers will pull out specific information and put that into their recommendations, which all goes to that narrative. So I work with my students on a resume, and a lot of teachers have their own forms or questionnaires they want students to complete. We work on those together. And then we also do the counselor questionnaire, and that should also include the resume. If you're an 11th grader or 11th grade parent on this evening and your student hasn't asked 2 teachers for a recommendation yet, one of them being an 11th grade core teacher, one of the 5 subjects, they need to do it before the end of the month.
Thank you, Kristen. Let's switch gears and talk about the college essay. What is essential to know?
Yeah, well, I'm working right now with my 11th graders on the college essay, and everyone kind of has the deer in a headlights eyes initially because there's so much talk about this essay. And while it is very important, I say to my students right out of the gates, you have done all of the hard work. You have 3 years of hard work behind you. This is your opportunity to let someone who has no idea who you are just have a glimmer into what's important to you about something that you may be interested in, that you're passionate about, a person who's influenced you, a triumph you've had, or an experience that's really shaped your perspective on life or on how you conduct yourself or what you think of yourself. So this is that opportunity. So I try to turn it into, instead of being a scary thing, try to see it as a pretty awesome opportunity to let someone know about you. And sometimes I have students who are just like, well, I can't write about, I had a student, it was so funny, last month who said, I'm supposed to write about a trauma and I don't have one. And I don't want to write about a trauma. And I'm like, who told you you had to write about a trauma? No. And then I had another student who said, I can't write about sports. I'm like, why not? If a sport is a very instrumental part of your life and it's really helped define you in some way or teach you a life lesson or whatever, you can absolutely write about it. There is literally no topic that is off limits. The topic is the vessel to take that reader on that journey about giving a little insight into you and what your perspective is on something. So we start the college essay and we start initially with a thought outline. Sometimes there are a couple topics that students are thinking about. So we do a couple topic outlines and then we dive deeper into the actual essay. But I try to tell students like, give yourself a little bit of grace because you've done a lot of the hard work already. This is just a really awesome opportunity to let someone know something about you.
Kristin, often this time of year after exams, kids will be working on the essay in class.
Mm-hmm.
How do you, with your students, do you help them to pick a topic and, how do you help them make going so that, they're not kind of off in a different avenue when they're working on their own?
Sure, exactly. So when there are quite a number of students who are actually, as you said, once they're done with the APs or their exams, they're starting to do a little bit of essay work in their English classes. And I never want to confuse my students. So what I do is I provide them with my thoughts on the college essay, having read well over 10,000 of these, and give them my recommended essay structure. And we do some brainstorming on essay topics. And I can tell you that those questionnaires that you have to do for your counselor are a wonderful brainstorming exercise because you literally have to sit there and think about yourself. What's important to you? How would you define yourself in 3 adjectives? What activity is interesting to you? Nobody sits around and thinks about these things, not adults and not young people. So those questionnaires are wonderful brainstorming topics to get kind of thinking about topics. So I do that with my students ahead of time. I show them some essay examples. And then I let them go to their English classes and do their work there. And then when they're done, we come back together and we work together on what they've produced in their English class.
Thanks for that, Kristin. All right, at the very beginning, when we talked about the changes in admissions, you mentioned that many colleges are wanting to see test scores, and it's not so test optional anymore. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about those schools that say they're test optional, but maybe they're test preferred.
Right, exactly. So, I don't have a crystal ball, but I doubt we'll ever totally leave a test optional landscape. But colleges are looking, as I talked about earlier, for some other indicators of academic fit and academic readiness. So more and more students are submitting their test scores. This past year, 11%. There was an 11% increase in students submitting their test scores. The Common App did like a survey and it came out that 92% of students will take either the SAT or the ACT. And for highly selective schools, you're going to see more students who are accepted who've submitted their scores. Like Boston College, 74% of the students submitted their scores. You're going to see that with more highly selective schools. As well. It is a differentiating factor. So if your student or a student is on here is a good test taker, it can really be a feather in your cap. Initially, 4 years ago, when I was advising students, I would say to them, if you weren't in the top 75th percentile of a school's, your score wasn't in the top 75th percentile of what a school admitted, then we wouldn't submit. I have now moved to the 50%, and even depending on the student and depending on their courses and their GPA and their overall profile, we may go even lower. And we're also seeing that some colleges are also going back to testing. Obviously the Ivies have all gone back to testing, but this past year, University of Miami and Ohio State are now requiring testing next year. If you're applying to any state school in Florida, testing is required. University of Georgia, testing is required. So we're seeing schools slowly go back to that. And I say to my students, any time spent on test prep is time well spent because of this.
Agreed. Definitely, Kristin. So let's talk a little bit about the SAT and the ACT and the differences. And if it's okay with you, since this is my area, I thought that I would share this information with parents. So many of you know about the SAT because in the Mid-Atlantic area, the SAT is kind of like the go-to test. But in other areas of the country, that's not quite true. The ACT is a predominant test. So let's talk about the differences, because the truth is that every college in the country will accept any test. Schools don't have a preference. And many times parents will say, well, if I'm applying to this school, do you think they like the SAT or the ACT better? And the answer is, it doesn't really matter, honestly. So the SAT made some pretty significant changes a few years back, and they went from a pencil and paper to a digital version of the test. And it's also adaptive. So when kids see a module in math, depending on how they do, the next module will be either harder or easier. The same with reading and writing. And so that's the adaptive nature of the test. The SAT is considered a power test, meaning that there's actually kind of a lot of critical thinking and analysis that students have to do to answer the questions. I do think it's the harder test. There's more cognitive horsepower you have to put into each question. However, there are fewer questions, and so that is definitely a benefit of the SAT. There are 2 sections on the test, reading and writing and math. So math is half the test, and the test is about 2 hours long now. The ACT in its current form, it's changing in September, but right now it is still a paper test. It is an easier test in many ways. You don't have to really analyze the questions so deeply and to think like, what are they really asking me? But it's considered the speed test. So you have to go at a pretty fast clip to finish each section. So there are more questions, but they're shorter. And there are 4 sections on this test currently. There's English, which is really writing, math, reading, and science. However, in September of this year, we're going to see lots of changes with the ACT. And we're going to see a shorter test, more in line with the current SAT. Because when the SAT changed, they took a lot of market share, and a lot of kids said, oh, digital, I like that. Oh, shorter, I like that. And they jumped to the SAT. So ACT said, oh, wait, not so fast. We're making changes too. So they have a shorter test. There will be fewer questions. And now the composite score, which used to be on the 4 sections I mentioned, you only have to take 3 to get a composite score. So you only have to take English, math, and reading, because science will be optional. But we are encouraging kids to take the science section, especially if they want to major in a STEM field. So all of these changes will debut for test takers in September of 2025. So that's what's happening with testing. Sometimes kids are asking, oh, wait, should I take, for the ACT, should I take the paper and pencil now and take the digital test in September? Would that be okay? Especially for current juniors? And the answer is sure, you can totally do that. And those scores will be super scored, meaning that the ACT will allow schools to take the top score, say, for example, in the math on one test and the top score for other areas in another test, and put them together. That's what a super score is. So that's definitely an option for students. But whatever test kids decide, we encourage them to really put their time into one test instead of splitting their focus. So for example, if your student has taken the PSAT and they're really comfortable with that test, they got a decent score, they think they can improve it, then given the changes with the ACT, that may be a better route for them. But if they took the PSAT and they were not at all happy with their score and they want to explore what else is out there, then considering the ACT would be a good idea. So the summer is key for test preparation. Whoops, sorry about that. I think this is an ideal time for kids. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Kristin, and what you encourage your students to do?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, it's just, you just have the sheer luxury of time. As we talked about, grades, super important. School year, you kids are busy, grades are the most important thing. Summer just gives you the luxury of time to prep. And if a student has already taken Algebra 2, there is no reason that they shouldn't spend some time in the summer preparing, whether they even be a rising 10th grader or a rising 11th grader. Definitely a rising 11th grader, we already say in this summer, you should start doing prep for sure. That gives you more time to take tests during the school year and also to have time to prep efficiently during the summer.
And we're also happy to talk to parents. I have a team at the company that works specifically on test prep, and we're happy to talk to you about, which test might be best or the timeline for testing. And you can find more on our website, which is ectutoring.com/test-prep. All right, so Kristin, enough of all this testing stuff.
Yeah.
Talk about creating the college list and
Sure.
the difference between match and fit.
Sure, absolutely. A lot of people, it's kind of like the holistic review. Again, the buzzword match versus fit. I want to talk about fit first. I say to my students, the most important thing for you to concentrate on is fit. We're going to talk about match in a second. And what fit is literally what you would think. What do you want out of a college experience? That's what I'm always asking my students. How do you foresee spending your weekends? What's important for a school to have? I've had students in the past who, like, having a really beautiful library was super important to them. So we did a bunch of research on libraries. I've had students where it's important that they be able to be in nature so that they can, they like to run and they like to be out in nature, or they like to be in the middle of the city and enjoy cultural events and museums and all the things. So how do you envision your college experience? Do you want to go to sporting events, or do you like Greek life, or whatever that is? So that's where we start first. And then there are a number of different factors that I ask my students to consider to think about fit. One, and the most important, is going to be academic alignment. Does the college offer the majors that you're interested in pursuing, or you think you want to explore? Making sure that those exist. Some schools allow more academic freedom and cross-pollination and interdisciplinary studies between different areas. Some don't as much. It's a very, if you're applying to an engineering school, you're in the engineering school. Looking at the core requirements, some schools have foreign language requirements, some schools have math requirements, and seeing what fits with what you're looking for in a school. The other thing I have my students do, I have every single student look at the mission and vision of the university. It also helps with supplemental essays, but because some colleges, they emphasize certain things. You'll see some put an emphasis on research, others put an emphasis on service, some put an emphasis on what we just talked about, academic freedom. So does that align with what you're looking for in a college experience? So, and then the other thing that's super important, if a student has learning differences and they need support services, going to speaking to the disability office and making sure that they offer the services that your student needs. It's required by law that every school have a student services disability service office, but it varies in what types of accommodations they provide students. So doing that research. The other thing to look at is social environment. Obviously, we just talked about that. How do you foresee spending your time when you're not in school? Do they have specific clubs that you may be interested in? Another thing important, geographic context. How far do you want to be from home? Do you want to be a plane ride? Do you only want to be a few hours? Do you want to stay in state, out of state? Do you want a big school, a small school? Those types of questions. Another one that's really important to have with your student is financial fit. You need to have those conversations. We talked about earlier about like return on investment. Those conversations need to be had with your student with regards to cost of college. And then aspirational. What are your career goals? Look at and see what kind of alumni network they have. Where do they place their students upon graduation? And the last thing, which is super important, is emotional. If you go and you sit in the student union or go sit in the campus quad and you see students milling about, I talk to my students all the time. They're like, well, I just sat there and I saw what the students were doing over the, they were playing Frisbee and they were doing this. And oh my gosh, I just felt so at home. I loved that vibe. That is you can't discount that emotional connection that you feel to a school. So this requires a lot of self-knowledge and it requires a lot of research. Now, for you younger people, you've got the luxury of time for that. For you 11th graders, don't despair. Once you're out of school, you can dive deep and start doing these research and start doing this self-reflection to put together schools that you feel are a fit for you.
Kristin, how does match versus fit factor into building a balanced list and making sure it really, really is balanced?
Right, exactly. So I always say to my students, it's your job to find the fit. It's my job to make sure we have the match and the balanced list. And that's another buzzword you hear, balanced list. What does that mean? That's making sure that your list of colleges that you're going to apply to, that you have groupings from each one of the categories. People will say safeties. I call them most likelies because their college admissions is not an exact science. That is where your GPA and testing, if you choose to submit, is higher than what the average student who's accepted to that school is. Then we have targets where your GPA testing, if you submit, is right in line with that. And then we have reaches where the school maybe is their testing and their GPAs are a little higher than yours. And if a school has a low acceptance rate, which I would say is anything under 25, 20%, and then boy, if we get into those single digits, that's going to be a reach for everybody. So making sure that that list is balanced. I also say to my students, there should be not one school on that list that you wouldn't go to. It's a waste of your time and your money to be applying to schools that you have no intention of attending. And when we started this webinar in the beginning, we talked about how competitive the landscape is. So now more than ever, it's really important that every school on that list is a school that you would go to and be excited about.
For sure. Thanks for that, Kristin. And that kind of leads us to the importance of a plan and making sure that, you've thought strategically about the process.
Absolutely. And I know we have students in various grades here, but it's really important that you take the time, do the self-reflection, build the story, and do things with intention and purpose. For you younger students, you have the luxury of time for that. For you older students, it's how you're now going to package that in your application that's in part important. So for a blueprint for success, ninth graders, it's about exploration, thinking of those things that you may be interested, exploring them a little bit, putting yourself out there. By the middle of 10th grade, you should start be formulating a little bit more purpose in what you're doing. By 11th grade, you should be diving deep into those things that you're interested, looking for those leadership opportunities, looking for the places where you can make an impact. And then by this time, as an 11th grader, like I'm already working on college applications with my students. And then 12th grade, by then, it's just finishing, putting the icing on the cake and getting those applications in.
Kristin, at the end of the day, there really is a college for everyone. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And we've been doing these webinars for years, and we always end with this. And it's really, really important to know that there is a college for everyone. Thousands of qualified students every year are denied from universities. It has no indication of a student's worth, of how successful they'll be, or how happy they will be in life. And also, college is what you make of that experience. We could sit here for another hour and talk about students that I've had who there's a school on their list that it may not be their number one choice, but when we get to the point of decisions coming in and we talk about it, and all of a sudden they realize, wow, that is a school, well, I will have the opportunity to do this that I wouldn't have had if I had been at this school, and I'm excited about it. So college is really what you make of that experience. And there truly is, there's over 2,000 colleges out there. So be creative. The same 20 colleges on the tips of everyone's tongue. Start thinking a little bit outside of the box. There are some schools that most people haven't heard of that actually have top 10 programs in the country in different things. So really do your research.
Thank you for that, Kristin, and thank you for lending your expertise. I just want to share a little bit about our programs. Kristin, do you want to talk a little bit about what you do on a daily basis and all of our other college consultants at Educational Connections?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, as I said, I'm currently working on applications with my rising seniors. I'm actually not taking any new 11th graders to rising seniors, but I love working with younger kids, 9th, 10th. I even have 8th graders. But we also have amazing other counselors at Educational Connections who have room on their rosters for 11th graders. And it's not too late as an 11th grader to get with someone and start thinking through that plan, thinking through that narrative, and working on those applications.
Thanks, Kristin. And we're happy to talk to you, parents, and students. If you'd like to schedule a call to talk a little bit about your situation and the help that you might need, we can share with you about our program and see if it's a fit. You can find more on our website, which is ectutoring.com, or you can scan the QR code. Thank you, Kristin. You've been such a wealth of information this evening. Thank you for being my guest, and to all the parents and hopefully some students out there, thank you so much for attending. And Rhonda, you are amazing. Thank you for everything you do for your students, but for hosting us this evening and for organizing this. You've been really terrific to work with, and we are grateful. And thank you again, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.